Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussions, news, and interviews, presenting The Film Scene with Illeana Douglas. Illeana is an actress, writer, author, and film historian with a need to discuss movies that borders on obsession. You'll learn the history of movies one great story at a time. The Film Scene is the deep cuts of movie podcasts, featuring movies we love by the people who made them. And now, Illeana Douglas.
Why, hello, everyone. It's Illeana Douglas. Welcome to the Film Scene. I'm here with Jeff Graham.
Jeff Graham, it's the Contagion film scene, right?
Yes. Where I got my gloves, where everything is wiped down.
For you podcast listeners, I do have to say, we always talk about Illeana's style. It's unparalleled compared to the rest of this business. And you're looking very Park City, Utah today, very Sundance. We have a very chic beanie.
I got this hat in Sundance.
Did you see? I just knew it.
Yes, I did.
A scarf. It's funny. It's raining in LA.
Vest. Yeah.
All TV productions are on halt. My wife, who works at Jimmy Kimmel, will no longer be working with the studio audience.
Yes.
It is an interesting time to be alive.
Got the call yesterday. TCM Film Festival is canceled.
Yeah.
So that was a blow, and very sad. Just always look forward to that every year. What Christmas devastating to me, also the close of the Broadway shows.
That feels a little ominous.
It feels very ominous. It really does. Because, New York is, if there's no Carnegie Hall and no Broadway, and, what do we do? And as entertainers, what do we do with this information to try to make people feel better?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's just, the crazy one to me is South by. You think of South by Southwest just canceled, and man, the music's going for a long time today.
The movies.
Right, we love the song, but we gotta start the show. South by, it's crazy to me because you think about all these filmmakers who this is kind of their shot. You think of someone like
film is opening.
Illeana Dunham, who her film Tiny Furniture in 2012 premiered at South by.
Right.
Judd Apatow was there, and then she got greenlit to create Girls for HBO.
Mm-hmm.
You wonder how many like Lena Dunhams are there this year, ready to premiere their film, who kind of won't get that shot.
Well, yeah, you look back in history at films that opened before 9/11, films that opened right around Pearl Harbor. And you that just disappeared and kind of came back. I believe It's a Wonderful Life was delayed.
Wow.
For a year release again because they had made it and when it came out it didn't do well. With the timing of it, and then things grow in popularity. One of the things we were talking about is one of the fans suggested TCM about doing maybe there was a way to connect online and share stories. So I was thinking it might be fun next week, and this is all sort of coming together right now. We'll let everybody know a time if they want to call in, and we can talk about some of my memories of the TCM Film Fest, and they can share their experiences. I guess we're just going to have to figure out a way to do everything online. It's going to be a different theatrical experience.
It will, but so for our listeners, if you're not already following Illeana on Twitter, make sure you follow her at Illeana Rama.
Yes.
One of my favorite handles online.
Thank you.
And we are going to tweet how we're going to cover this next week.
Right.
So a lot of you guys already do follow her, but if not, if you're a listener, hop on Illeana's Twitter, and we're hoping to do call-ins next week.
Yeah, that would be really great.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to suggest, because I have so much power, is that I'm imagining that if you can't go out, subscriptions to all the cable companies are just going to go through the roof. And I think it would be an incredibly nice gesture if some of these companies maybe took a 10% off of our bills, or offered, a free couple months of Netflix, just to offer people some relief of feeling like we're all in this together.
I think so. And you also think from a business perspective, if someone's not a Netflix subscriber right now, but they hear that they get 10% off, now's the time to grab those Corona customers.
I think that this is the time where you're looking to people, obviously like Bill Gates is doing his financing, putting together testing and things like that. And I think this is one of these moments where you look in your community and you look for people that have large corporations to give people some sense hope, I guess, because it's just such a trying time. You get very, very down. I'm obviously very down. I mean, just the thought that, again, somebody like, with the news, it's just surreal.
I know.
Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson, have coronavirus. It just does not seem possible.
We were chatting with our producer Ryan up at the top, and we were all agreeing that Tom Hanks is kind of like, he's like cinema's dad. He's like our nice uncle in a cardigan. And for coronavirus, how did you phrase it, Ryan? For coronavirus to go after him?
Oh, that was a power move.
It's a power move on coronavirus's part, because he's our guy, Tom Hanks.
It just seems it seems surreal.
It's very strange.
One of the most beloved, people, and it's sobering. If somebody like that and his film is shut down, and productions here are going to start to get shut down, and what is the economics of this over the next few months? We don't know.
We don't know. When you think back on your career, Illeana, can you think of any comparable? Do you feel like SARS was the same? Do you remember that affecting?
No, the only time was 9/11.
Yeah,
that was the only.
Were you shooting 6 feet during that time, or was that after?
I'm not quite sure. I know I was in LA.
Yeah.
And I know that things sort of shut down, and I know people were coming together, with big fundraisers and things like that for New York. I recall that. I do recall when we had the earthquake here in '94, that shut things down. But those are the only. This to me is uncharted territory, and people are really scared, and I still go. I go to my dance class. It's down to about 10 people now going to class. I mean, people are basically self-isolating.
Yeah.
And so you're home, but it's a very lonely feeling. We have to figure out something so that we can all communicate online and not get mentally down, because I think getting mentally down, it becomes a mental contagion, and
You're right.
you lower your immune system with fear.
I believe that.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that that's true, and especially I think most of us sort of feel that we don't have people out there that are, heading up the, spearheading this. So I think it's a state. We're into a state by state. Whoever's in charge in our state, we're going to be rallying.
It's been interesting. I mean, not only is this a huge cultural shift in terms of just global health, but from an entertainment industry perspective, Harvey Weinstein, 23-year sentence.
It's unbelievable. As we celebrate, and we didn't even say at the top of the show, we're using this whole month to Women's History Month to have only women guests on and talking about female filmmakers. And one of the things that I'm going to be asking Naomi is, the kind of movies that were made post MeToo. And it's, I don't think that people could have conceived, I certainly cannot conceive of this happening. I'm recalling back, when I did this television show Action, and we fictionalized, my character being bartered for sex to the Rothstein brothers. And this was part of the storyline, and we filmed it, and it was a nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of funny thing that everybody did. And I think that women actresses were numb and immune, that this is the way it is, and things will never change. And so to cut to all these years later, and not only is he sentenced, but he's sentenced to 23 years. He's, he will most likely probably die in prison. I think that it changes forever. Me Too, for me, the movement of Me Too is probably one of the most successful movements outside the Vietnam War, outside gay rights. I think it's one of the most successful. It's swiftly changing movements, radical movements that we have ever seen. And I believe that there's probably a segment of the population, male population, that is secretly thinking these women have gone too far. But for those people who think that, I think they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're wrong. It's like for some people that go, well, it's not so bad to have a few statues in the South. That kind of thinking is wrong thinking. And I think that for young men like you, I'm just curious. I would almost sense it's kind of a relief.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I would like to think, and I don't want to be one of those like overly optimistic millennials, but I feel like being indoctrinated into this new industry is so healthy for our generation. You know, it's like the idea of what we were hearing, that conduct in the workplace was just never something that would even cross our mind. You know, it does feel like a new landscape and climate. And, you know, your office is your office. It's a professional environment. And however, you know, misogyny aside, that kind of conduct just seems unacceptable for a workplace. I feel like that's the precedent that I hope our generation is at least looking at.
And what's interesting for my generation is that when I got into the film business, I was raised on movies that came out in the end of the 70s where it was all female leads. You know, it was Sally Field, Sissy Spacek, Jill Clayburgh, Jane Fonda, you know, so many people that you know were fronting headlining these, you know, these female driven movies. And when I first started working in the industry, it was, you know, Allison Anders and Martha Coolidge, and I had worked with all these female, and it was as we get in, this is what's so interesting, and I don't know why it is, but as we get into 1996, 97, 98, 99, as we get into those years, that's when everything kind of switched up. And we may look back on thinking that those people that were in power, the Weinsteins, the Moonveses, they put their stamp and they changed entertainment. And they were the ones who got the women out, put men in, started doing, like, let's do storylines, you know, with more violence depicted against women. You can see it in the films of that era, how the films from the early 90s seemed to change into the late 90s and the 2000s. And then we get into, you know, where I got involved, which was around 2012, 2013, when we started the Trailblazing Women show. By 2010, that was the most toxic environment that I ever felt, where I couldn't believe that the industry that I'd started in the 90s, I never saw female directors anymore.
Wow.
Where the crew seemed to be predominantly male. And I think that starting from about 2013 through MeToo and where we are now, I just think we're in an incredibly better place. But I hope that it's a cautionary tale that we never go back to where we were, where women were just not considered of any value.
Well, the important thing is, of course, from like a humanity perspective, that's essential, but also just from like an art perspective, it's so refreshing to have. I mean, when I look at some of my favorite projects over the last decade, really, I mean, starting from 2012, 2013, when, you know, women's voices were re-championed, most of my favorite stuff comes from female filmmakers. I just saw Kelly Reichardt's new movie, and, you know, it's just, we don't want one storyteller. You know, we want a myriad of storytellers, because I think Lena Waithe, who's a showrunner I really like, said, right now, even straight white dudes are bored of seeing straight white dudes on TV. You know, it's just more interesting if we can have multiple voices represented. So
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, absolutely. And the last thing I wanted to say, just as a personal citizen, is when I hope that the era of female lawyers fronting for really bad guys, I hope that it goes out of style.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing more distasteful than putting up a woman and using one woman and weaponizing her against other women. There's just something very unsettling about that. And so when Weinstein's lawyer came out, you know, and said, oh, this is obscene, and you know, again, it's the idea, oh, these women have gone too far, and, you know, he's an older man. What I always say to people, and in my own case and in his case, he did this.
Right.
The women didn't do anything. He got himself here, as any person who perpetrates a crime does. You have to live with the consequences of your decisions. You don't get mad at the victim,
Right.
Who eventually says after 20, 30 years of this, because this is a mindset that went back to the 1950s, where it was just kind of expected, I guess, a quid pro quo of men in power, and it just ended. And I think the only thing that was upsetting for them is that it ended so rapidly. I do understand that. If you've had candy for 50 years and all of a sudden you can't do it anymore, it's a very rapid, kind of adjustment. But God, women don't represent bad guys.
Yeah.
Not good.
It's
Not good.
I hear what you're saying.
All right, on that note, let's bring in Naomi McDougall Jones. She's written this fantastic book, which I'm going to put up here. It's called The Wrong Kind of Woman. I've been spending all week reading it. She's got all sorts of statistics about where we are post MeToo. She's also been an actress herself and a screenwriter and written a play. She had a film that premiered at CineQuest. And but this book, which is The Wrong Kind of Woman, Inside Our Revolution to Dismantle the Gods of Hollywood, was published by Beacon Press in February. It's now available. And ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Naomi McDougall Jones. Hi, nice to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I never thought I'd welcome a guest by saying we have wiped down all the headphones.
I appreciate that.
My first question for you, because it's such a great title, what is the wrong kind of woman?
Well, the joke is sort of that's what every woman gets told in Hollywood is like, if you could just be a little...
Right, you're not this, you're not that.
Something other than what you are. And what I did over 100 interviews of women and men up and down the industry for this book, and I kept hearing that phrase over and over again from women saying, like, well, they just told me, like, if I were a little thinner or a little younger or a little less brown or like whatever, that then you'd be the right kind of woman. And what I came to understand is that, of course, the problem is that we're women.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I think that with women, it's like you're like cattle, so there's, and that's what we were talking a little bit about Me Too at the top. It was like, well, it's just one woman.
Right.
And they don't realize, no, it's 80. It's
right.
80. But,
well, and really every actress at least, and as well as women in other roles in the industry, I actually made it a project when I was doing these interviews to try to find an actress who didn't have some story of sexual harassment or abuse, and I couldn't find one.
No, I don't. They say the statistics are 1 out of 4, but I actually think it's 1 out of 2.
Way higher than
and
that.
I actually think, again, even as with all these sort of movements, even men now are a little. From my own personal experience, are more vocal, talking about their own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's right. It's not just women who have been victimized.
Yeah, where they've been, again, mortified to even talk about it. I think that, again, the openness of saying of telling stories. I've been somewhat, again, shocked by some of the stories that that I've heard. And one of the things you wrote, which I thought was fascinating, you said writing the book was like being inside a washing machine because the narrative kept changing.
Right.
And I absolutely agree with you. Did you start out to write one book and had it shift, or how did that happen?
It didn't really shift, but so the way I got to write this book is that I gave this TED Talk in 2016 about what it's like to be a woman in Hollywood. That's sort of the basis for this book. And then a year after I gave it, the Weinstein story broke, and I got an email from TED.com saying, we're putting your talk on our homepage tomorrow. Get ready.
Wow.
That was the email.
Yeah.
I was like, what does that mean? And then 1 million people watched that talk in the next 3 months. And so I received this publishing deal. So I began writing the book very much in the immediate aftermath of the whole Weinstein Me Too moment. And it was like at first people were saying like, well, everything is different now. Like this is fixed. They just didn't understand before. Now they know this is going to be better. And sort of as the months went by, some people maintained that narrative, but what became clear is that actually not very much had changed.
In terms of creatively, or you mean in terms of the power dynamic?
Both. I mean, it would be inaccurate, obviously, to say that nothing has changed, but I would say, based on the data, it's also inaccurate to say that anything has really substantively changed. I had plenty of stories of actresses that I interviewed who had been sexually harassed in public, in professional situations by men in the immediate months after Weinstein, and nobody stepped in to help them even. So I think that is not as solved as we'd like to think it is. And certainly behind the camera, the numbers have barely moved at all in terms of women directors, writers, producers.
It feels like, I mean, I'm in the Academy, and it feels like that there's more female directed films, but again, it's not like they get the studio push,
Right.
behind them. Like I was watching Portrait of a Woman on Fire. It was on the Academy list, and I voted for it and everything, but it was like it wasn't getting any push until after the Oscars were over, and suddenly it came out, but it was out, before
and
that.
there was such a, as you say, there was such a great crop of films by female directors this year that could have
incredible.
been nominated, and just were totally
Yeah. Well, again, I think it still has to do with a patriarch of that there still are some barnacles of that exist, that so much of, of some of these men that were in charge, got fired or, were released. But there's a little bit of the old guard left, I think,
definitely.
that wants to keep things the way they were.
And I think it's not even just the old guard. I mean, I think, you're hearing a lot of complaints now from younger white men who are saying like, oh God, like I would have gotten that job, but they gave it to this woman of color because because like they were afraid or whatever. And you're starting to hear a lot of that narrative, which I find very concerning because of course that's not real. What's real is that they've had 95% of the pie, and now it feels like where they're being asked to have less, and it feels very panicky. But they're 30% of the U.S. population. So all we're saying is like, hey, that means that 70% of us are the rest of the population, and our voices have been almost completely absent from the cultural narrative. Like, could we just have like our proportional number of jobs and stories, please?
I felt working in the industry that there has been a change because, as I was saying at the top of the show, when I started working in the early 90s, and there was tons of female directors, and then as I got into the late 90s, that's when it seemed to disappear.
Yeah.
And then that's why I was saying by 2010, which seems to correlate with so many facts you have in your book, by 2010, the atmosphere on a film set was that women would be huddled together, some kind of fear that something horrible was going to happen.
Yeah. And that does track perfectly with the history of what's been happening, because there was that 1979 court case where 6 female directors got together with the DGA and sued the studios for hiring discrimination because between 1945 and 1979, less than 1/2% of films and television shows were directed by women. So they did sue, and there was this moment very similar to the moment we've just been through where the studios were like, okay, like, we'll hire this woman, please stop yelling at us, press release. And so there was this moment where that number briefly spiked to 8% in film and 16% in television, and there was sort of this feeling of, okay, like they didn't know before, now they know.
Right.
This will we're not at 50% yet, but this will keep getting better. But of course that peaked in the early 90s, and then the numbers began to backslide as everyone looked away, and then it's been basically at 4% since then.
When I did the show Trailblazing Women, it was the same thing. We were trying to track. We went back to the silent era up until Catherine Bigelow finally won an Oscar. And again, through doing the show, of course, you're trying to find all these reasons. Well, what is the reason women were excluded, and what was the reason? In the silent film area, they got rid of all the men. And I remember I was interviewing Jane Fonda, and she just looked at me and she goes, "We live in a patriarchy." I was like, oh, okay. Well, that was.
But basically.
Because I can never really find a significant answer, but what do you think is the root of why women seem to get to a certain point and then boom? they're excluded.
I mean, I think the answer lies in the reason that they kicked women out in the silent film era, which was that initially it wasn't really considered an industry. Film was just kind of an eccentric hobby, and anyway, the men were away fighting World War I, and they were like, yeah, sure, whatever, that's fine. And they were making these radically feminist movies about, I mean, and not just feminist, but about cross-dressing and lesbianism and birth control and showing themselves naked on screen, and they were sparking riots in theaters. They were getting banned across the country. And so you can see in contemporaneous documents that when Wall Street came in and was going to start investing, they said, you've got to get rid of the women.
Right.
Because A, they don't know how to run business, obviously, and B, because we're going to have a problem if women in society keep getting to watch these movies. They're going to start getting ideas in their head about what society should be like. And I don't think we're quite in that place anymore, but I think it stems from that same fear. And I mean, what we're talking about is a group of people who have held all of this power for now nearly a century, and all of this fame and all of this prestige and all of this money, and they don't actually want to give it up. I mean, that really is as simple as that.
I think so. There was another period in the 1940s where, again, men were at war, women were working in the factories. And again, it seems to coincide with the with the female-driven picture of the 1940s, with all these incredible parts. And film noir movies, too, with great women leads. And then again, as we get into the 60s, boom, you get right back to, Valley of the Dolls, and women become much more subservient again in the early 60s and mid 60s. It's all Doris Day movies and.
Well, and it is fascinating, that sort of reverse trajectory. I cite Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth in this book, which is, of course, an iconic book from the 90s. And she has a theory that women's roles on screen have actually gotten worse as women's power in society has gotten better, sort of as a reactionary, like, no,
right,
like no, stay, and it is true. The violence against women has increased tenfold in the last couple decades. Women are more likely to be naked and scantily clad on screen than they used to be, so that you actually see these more and more demeaning roles as women do actually gain power elsewhere.
Yes. So then tell me about, because again, you had your own experience of going to acting school and then again going out in the marketplace. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was a white lady from Colorado who was raised by a feminist mother to believe that this was like basically solved. Like I could do whatever I wanted to do, and that my vagina would never be a problem. Like that was just normal. And I went to acting school with that feeling, and watched Meryl Streep and the roles that she got to play, and that was my dream, to tell important stories that mattered. And got out of acting school and just, as I don't have to tell you, started auditioning for the most ridiculous, I'd be auditioning against 300 other amazing women to play Naked Corpse number 4. And like a couple of years into that, I was like, this is not what I came here to do.
What's funny is, I came into it a backwards way, because I started out trying to do those, going to backstage, and they'd get rid of me immediately. So I went in a different way, which is, I started working for a publicist and just sort of gave up the idea of acting. I said, well, maybe I'll be a writer or something. And then I ended up working around all these filmmakers. And that's how I skipped
you skipped this purgatory.
I skipped the line, but coincidentally, when you were saying, oh, you're not this, you're not, I never had an agent. I never could get an agent. I was in films. When I'm in the movie.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was in this movie Goodfellas that Lorraine Bracco took a liking to me, and she got me an agent. But I still couldn't, because I was always told, no, you're too weird, too quirky.
There were so many interview conversations I had with women where they had like that conversation, like you were in movies, people were casting you in movies, and the agents were like, no, nobody would cast you in a movie, and you're like, no. And there's a conversation that filmmaker Keith Agentis had where she went into an executive at a TV network and was pitching her show about, she's a middle-aged, an over 40 woman, and the show was about over 40 women, and the studio executive was like, I love this would be great, this is exactly the kind of thing, have your agent submit it to me. And Keitha didn't have an agent, and so Keitha went to the agencies and was like, hey, this studio executive wants to read it. Will you just send them the thing? You can collect your 10%. You haven't done anything. I just need you to send this email. And the response she got was, well, nobody would put a woman your age in a writer's room.
Yeah. I think women hear a lot, an interesting thing about women, I always think that people feel very comfortable saying almost the most horrible things.
No, they say the inside things outside. It's so, I mean, that as a young actress and then as a young filmmaker, I just couldn't believe not only that this level of sexism existed, but that it was so fine that they would just say the things.
Yeah, it's kind of like having your older brother constantly be your agent or your manager or something.
Yeah.
But, for some reason, again, this is within everybody's path. There has to be a certain point where you either get angry or, in my case, I really think it was just poverty. Like I had no money. So I said, well, I'm funny. I'm just going to go do stand-up.
Yeah.
And I started making $50 here and there, because I you can't get work, can't get an agent. You have to find something to do. Or did you ever reach that point, like you said, get angry and then when you start making things on your own, it's like a magic door seems to open. And I'm really powerful. I don't need any of these people.
Right. Well, that's exactly what happened. Is after a couple of years out as an actress, on doing that, I was just like, I can't. The acting is the only thing I've ever wanted to do, and I cannot do this anymore. I could write better roles for women. I'll just do that. So I made my first feature film with a friend, and that's when I really understood the sexism, because people said things to us out loud in meetings just like, well, girls, you know that you're going to have to get a male producer on board at some point just so that people will trust you with their money.
Right.
And sort of this endless refrain of nobody wants to see stories about women. Mm-hmm. You should think about making something else. So that was... Two things happened at that point. One was that I knew I had to be a filmmaker for the rest of my life and could keep making, and like inside the system, outside the system, it didn't matter. Just make my stories and get them to audiences. And secondly, that I had to talk about what I was experiencing really loudly, because this was in 2013, 2014. And although there were women talking about it, it was still very siloed. I didn't feel like I was hearing women talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I discovered we were living in the Matrix. Like nobody was talking about it, which is how this whole thing happened, because I just started sort of mouthing off in Q&As after the screenings of that film, which we did make. And then very quickly got put on sort of the global speaking circuit talking about it, mainly because I didn't know enough to know that I was imperiling my career by saying these things in public, but was quickly informed of that when I finally stopped speaking to civilians and other filmmakers, all of whom were outraged, but had the opportunity to speak to an insider industry group, and a female producer, a very successful indie female producer who was one of my heroes at that point, came up to me afterwards and she said, I don't think it's a good idea to play the woman card. And I've seen women's careers get destroyed for a lot less than you're saying.
I personally find things like that, again, you just have to be immune to what anybody says. The only person that matters is what you want to do and how you want to live your life.
Totally. Well, and that was the moment that I got really mad. Then I was like, well, then it doesn't matter. Then then that means that I will never actually have the career I'm supposed to have anyway. I will never actually get to be the artist I can be within the system. So then I just have to be part of fixing it and continue talking and continuing making my stuff. And I do think that ultimately is the answer, is we have to stop playing by their rules, because their rules are rigged against us. Like, that is what I discovered in writing this book. There is no woman who has ever had the career in the film industry that she would have had if she were a white man.
No.
And so if that's true, and it is true, and if you don't believe me, read this book, then you just have to make up your own rules like you did and like I've done, and just find ways around and just like stop committing to their value system.
Well, this is my theory. And, next week we're going to be talking to an author named Christina Lane, who wrote a book about an extremely successful producer named Joan Harrison. She was the muse, really, and kind of the genius behind Alfred Hitchcock, but nobody knows who she is. And my secondary theory is you can be incredibly successful if you're willing to have no credit and be behind someone.
Right.
And that is a choice.
Sure.
And I've certainly made that choice myself sometimes, and it doesn't feel great, but when you're, when you think, again, compared to someone else. But I have found if that is one way to do it, and you can look at some partnerships and in the industry of some incredibly talented women that are really behind some incredibly successful men, but you don't really hear so much about the women and they're okay with that.
And I guess I just couldn't, like, for myself personally, I don't think I could do that, but that is definitely the other way.
Do you think that movies played a part in why we don't want women to succeed? Because again, if you see these, you see Leave It to Beaver, and you see these images that they certainly didn't exist in any world I grew up in, and yet you see these things. So then when you see a woman being, very ballsy and wanting things, it's repellent to you because you can't understand why she's...
Absolutely. And I think it's actually worse than that, because if you think about the fact that 95% of all of the films that you've ever seen out of U.S. mainstream cinema were directed by men, and overwhelmingly white men.
Right.
And 80 to 90% of all of the leading characters that you've ever seen in a movie were men, overwhelmingly white men, and 55% of the time that you've seen a woman on screen, she was naked or scantily clad.
Right.
And then you think about the slew of studies showing that the films we watch do affect everything in real life, from our purchasing decisions to our hobbies to our career choices to our relationship status to our identity to our views of other people to literally our brain chemistry. And then you think again about the fact that white men are 30% of the population. What we're talking about is 30% of the population creating this visual web of language that we all live in that is almost complete. So I actually think we can't even see ourselves at this point except through white men's eyes.
Right, from what you've seen on screen. So some of the facts that are in your book are phenomenon of women being seen but not speaking on screen. You're right. I've seen that a lot. I think again, men want women to be sort of beautiful statues,
right?
But not really speak a lot.
Right. Well, and there's that stat from the Gina Davis Institute. So there's 2 men on screen for every 1 woman, which is true of leading characters, supporting characters, and also crowd scenes. So films are literally like a warped reality where women are a minority population, which is so bizarre. But then they also have a third less dialogue. So if they are on screen, they are only there to be looked at.
But I must say, do you agree that when you look at movies of the past, I do not see that? Like, one of the things, if I'm seeing a movie from the 50s, you often see a wonderful mix of men and women. And another thing, by the way, they're not good looking.
Right.
Actually, in the movies of the 50s, it seemed to be predominantly, they'd find like real people that looked all craggy. And they were the townspeople. Now everyone seems to be uniformly
gorgeous.
They look, if it's a restaurant scene, everyone in the background looks sort of,
normal. I mean, I
perfect.
routinely watch British television shows in my life just to see women's foreheads move. It's like such a soothing thing to be like, oh yeah, you're just a human being.
Another fact I loved is that the average age for women winning an Oscar is 36. How did you figure that? Was that just something that...
luckily, somebody else had done that research, so I didn't have to go through. But so
it's very odd.
For women, it's 36. For men, it's 44.
Oh my God. So
there is this, and also this links to the availability of roles for each gender in various decades of their life. So women, the predominant majority of roles available to women are when they're in their 20s.
Right.
And it precipitously drops off every decade after that. Men actually have very few roles available in their 20s. The 30s are their heyday. 40s pretty much keep pace, and then it kind of just starts to trickle off. So the implications of that are pretty spirally, in the sense that, okay, for one thing, what we're saying is that we value women when they're young, beautiful, and don't really know anything.
Yes.
Right? Whereas men become valuable when they're older and they know things and they're humans and they probably have status in the world. it also has a weird effect on the careers of actresses versus actors because, there's the thing of it takes 10 years for an overnight success, right? Which is pretty true. Like, you need to be working in the industry for 10 years before you're going to hit it. Well, if a woman goes to acting school, graduates, as she's been told to do, becomes a trained actress, graduates when she's 21, well, by the time she hits that 10-year mark, all the roles are gone.
Right.
Whereas a man can spend those 10 years sort of schmooping about, becoming a person in the world, and then hits his career stride right when the roles become available. So what there's a reason that so many actresses who have become famous started as teenagers, because actually you need that decade in your teens. But then you think about what kind of culture that creates is, again, like, you have a way more vulnerable population of actresses who are very young, who have not lived real lives outside of Hollywood, at arm's length with all these, men who are much more seasoned and have a lot more power. Right.
Do you think that's something people should be taught in acting school?
100%. So it's now my mission for the next year to get this book taught in every film school and acting school in the country, because we do such a grave disservice to women and people of color and everybody who isn't a white man by not being honest about this.
Right.
Because what I heard over and over again in the interviews is that every woman goes through that thing of, like,
revelation.
You get out and you're like, well, I'm going to do this. And then you go through the period of, like, oh, I guess I'm not good enough. It must be my fault.
Right.
Oh, wait, maybe something. And you lose 10 to 20 to 30 years of your career to that thing. Whereas if they just said, look, this is the situation. These are the things you're going to be up against. And here are some tools and strategies and ideas for how to get around them, for how to deal with them. These are the options. Like, this is unfair, but we have to fix it. And the young white men should also be taught this, because they need to know what system they're upholding, because they don't know either. I received this heartbreaking email from a female director, like, within a week after the book came out, and she sent me this email saying, I have worked in this industry for 30 years, and I've spent 30 years blaming myself for my lack of success, and this book is the first time anybody told me it might not be my fault. It's just like what if just on day one somebody had been like, hey, here's the situation, like, don't waste any energy blaming yourself for it, like, just go forward and spend that energy making stuff.
Right. Another fact that which, again, I don't know where this theory that boys that it is 18 to 22 or that they're so important
as moviegoers,
and that they aren't important.
No.
And I knew this when I was a kid, that the people going to movies are girls.
Yeah. So
and how did that? How did that start? Do you have any? It's myth. It's a total myth.
It's a total myth, right? So there's this 4-quadrant marketing theory that sort of rules the studios and has since at least the 80s, where they say, okay, everybody who's under 22 or whatever is a teenager, then you divide it into men and women. Everybody above 22 is men and women. Only Hollywood would put the dividing line of the population at 22, right? But anyway, that aside. But so you sort of figure out, like, which quadrants any given film is going to appeal to. And they've always claimed that the mother lode was the teenage boys. And there's no data to back this up. Like, today, if you look, films by and about women make more money dollar for dollar spent, which makes sense because women buy 52% of the movie tickets. But I thought, so I knew that, but going into researching this book, I thought, okay, well, at some point the teenage boy thing must have been true, right? Like, they just haven't updated their information, but that must have been. But then I was interviewing a former studio executive who said, no, it wasn't true in the 80s. He said there was a data guy for Hollywood who, like, ran all the box office numbers and, like, delivered them to the studios. He was the data guy. And he said that guy in the 80s ran a study to figure out who was the perfect audience member.
Right.
And at that time, he discovered that it was a 13-year-old girl. And so that guy, who they were all paying for the rest of their data, went to the studios and said, hey, I think you've got the wrong end of the stick here. I think you should be making movies for teenage girls. And they went, oh, that doesn't sound right. That can't be true.
Yeah, I can see. I've participated in maybe about 5. One television show that I did, that had the market, where you market research and the dials and everything, and about 5 films that I did where people watched the movie and then they talked afterwards.
It's focus grouping.
Focus grouping. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
And I never once saw, and that's not a lot, that's say so 5 or 6 times, I never once saw a boy 18 to 22. Never.
Yeah.
The only obnoxious, it was usually like a guy in his 30s or 40s that was like the one obnoxious person. And guess what? There's a lot of like negative women too.
Right,
like,
of course.
But I used to think, where's this 18? Because I never saw young people participate in a focus group ever.
And the thinking was of the 4 quad. So their like vague theory was that, okay, well, older men are going to be working, right? So they're probably staying late at work. It's going to be hard to get them to come out to a movie theater. The women are at home unloading the dishwasher or whatever they're doing.
Right.
Young girls, we just won't talk about, but like the teenage boys, like will have the money and they're going to come out on opening weekend. But now that logic doesn't even make sense on its face, because where are the teenage boys? They're playing video games at home. They're not coming back to the theaters. And the studio executive said, like, now the conversation is always like, well, how do we get the teenage boys back into the movie theaters? Like, we've got to figure out, like, what is the thing that's going to get them back? It's like, let them go. They don't care about you anymore. Like, make movies for people who are coming.
Well, I think, again, it's just the studio executives want to, they want to make movies that they want to see.
Exactly.
And they see themselves as young boys, 18 to 20. And therefore, that's why they do so many baseball movies.
Totally. Well, I mean,
baseball movie seems to be like, all right.
Yeah.
Well, enough baseball movies.
My experience of Hollywood is that there are it attracts men who have not progressed past the age of 13 emotionally.
Yes.
And so, like,
I would agree.
I think that is right. Yeah. That's exactly it. They're like, those are the movies they want to see, and it doesn't make sense to them that anything else could be true.
Because again, in my experience growing up, women always drove dating, going to a movie. Always.
Course. Like, have you spent any time in any family? Like, who is making these decisions?
A girl always, I would say 95% of the time. Does your wife dominate what movie
Plan
you go
making. This is resonating with me. It's interesting to hear. I think like the whole thing about sort of like the regressed male in power in Hollywood. Like our CEO Kevin talks about that all the time. It's a lot of like dudes who want to kind of relive the fantasies of adolescence professionally.
Yeah.
And
totally.
I like trying to call myself out and make sure that that's not like a pathology I'm subscribing to too. But I do see it a lot. A lot of this is like very resonant.
Yeah, and I interviewed this woman, Jessica Hines, for the book, who's primarily a script coach and writing teacher, but she has studied a lot the neuroscience behind how we respond to stories or not, right? Because part of the problem here is that everything that we have been told is great art, great and important art, is also through the white male gaze. So like we've been told that war stories are inherently very important and universal.
Yeah.
But that stories about women at home with children are not, which is confusing because how many people in the U.S. have actually gone to fight in a war? Thankfully, not that many. How many people in the U.S. have been stuck at home with children? But like, so why is this
I don't know.
small
I'm
and personal?
fascinated by how many movies there are about World War One.
Oh my God!
Like
and every
of all the wars.
What kills me about every director interview is they're always like, "Well, if this movie felt so important to make because it just felt like this story hadn't been told," and I'm like, every time I'm like, "It's been told. We're done. We don't need to tell it anymore."
No, there was the year before there was another movie about World War. There was probably again, and like you said, if you added them up, did you think? I didn't find anything in your book, but I often wondered, not so much anymore, but again, in order to win an Oscar, you usually had to be a prostitute. Like that was women were prostitutes, and when I was on TV, I played a prostitute, and it was like, oh, I guess I'm finally somebody.
You got your card.
I've
been finally asked to be a prostitute.
Well, and of course, black women can only be nominated for an Oscar if they're playing a slave.
Slaves.
And it's like you have to like fit again. You have to be like the right kind of woman. Right. Within our brains to warrant awards.
The right kind of suffering.
Yeah.
Were there another thing we talked about on the in terms of reviewers, the ratio of male reviewers to female reviewers, and I said that this year I've noticed how every time a man makes a movie, it's a masterpiece, and if a woman makes a movie, it's sparkling entertainment.
Yeah. Right. Or just like forgettable, or it's like too that's a thing they say a lot. It's like too small and personal. Right?
Small and personal. But
Yeah.
they always say that a man's movie is a masterpiece.
Always. Right. And so again, talking about the Jessica Hines theory of how we're processing stories, art is not objective, right? So we can't say like this is actually better than this. It's just whatever you experience. And so the way we resonate with stories is how much it actually is in resonance with our themes, our emotional themes from our lives. So if a white man who's an executive, has had a very tumultuous relationship with his father, let's say, and he reads a script about a white man having a very tumultuous relationship with his father.
Oh, God.
The script could be kind of mediocre, but he's going to be so moved by the experience of reading the script and be like, oh my God, this writer is speaking to me.
Right.
That he's going to be more likely to green like that. But let's say he gets a script about a pregnant woman. Let's say he's not married. Let's say he has no experience with pregnant women. Mm-hmm. He's going to read it. And even if it's the best written script ever, he's going to be like, this is so good. I just don't know who would want to watch. Like, it feels like there's no audience for this movie, which is a thing women get told all of the time. Like, this is so good, but what's the market? Who's going to want to see this?
Mm-hmm. And although I'm thrilled they're doing a remake of First Wives Club, I can't believe they didn't remake it immediately. That movie was so great when it came out, and so funny and so uplifting, and people that you love to see on screen. And I don't know how many years did it take? So they're finally going to do. But Jesus, they're in their 70s. Couldn't they have done it like the next year, for God's sakes? Although God bless them, I'm glad they're getting their remake. But
and there's an executive also told me that there's this term non-recurring phenomenon that's used among studio executives to describe films that do really well financially but don't fit into their understanding of what should do well financially. So like Bridesmaids hit it out of the park, and the studio executives looked at each other and said, that's weird. That must be a non-recurring phenomenon.
Wow. That's amazing.
Whereas if a movie about white men does well, they instantly make like 10 different versions of it because they're like, see, this did so well, but somehow they can't make that mental leap.
Are you seeing certain movies though that really look like that they're are old fashioned? I mean, I'm beginning to really see a progression of films, that seem to have benefited from MeToo, and then movies that you go, that seems a little.
I mean, the Oscars.
Tone deaf, I guess, would be
Oscars this year, I would say, featured many of those films that seem pretty old fashioned, and I think it's why the Oscars are becoming more and more irrelevant, because the rest of the country is like, what are you like? We don't care anymore.
Yeah.
Why are? But they're like they can't.
Do you think the Oscars too, or the Academy will sometimes like choose one figurehead female to like represent?
Oh, of course.
Like I feel like this year was Greta, and obviously Little Women was really wonderful, but like there were so many wonderful films, but I feel like they like kind of checked their box and
they're like, see, diversity solved.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing, so this is in the book. I was researching I was trying to parse all the Oscar data because, of course, only 5 women have ever been nominated for Best Director, and I was looking at Best Writer and all this stuff. And what I suddenly realized about the Best Director category was that, so only 3 of them have been nominated in the last 25 years, which I would say is like the modern cinema.
Catherine Bigelow, I believe, Lena Wertmuller.
No. Well, she was the first. But like within the last 25 years.
Got it.
So it was Sofia Coppola, Catherine Bigelow, and Greta Gerwig. So then I was like, well, how did these women do it? Like, what do they have in common? And I was like, okay, well, they're all white, straight, cis, able-bodied, obviously. They're all very talented. And every single one of them is either the wife or the daughter of a man who had already been nominated for or won an Oscar.
Oh my God, that's interesting.
Isn't that horrifying? So Sofia Coppola, Francis Ford, it helps if he's a living icon. That's very helpful.
Yes.
Catherine Bigelow, James Cameron, and Greta Gerwig, Noah Baumbach.
Yeah.
So what I suddenly realized in that moment is, like, if you are straight, white, cis, able-bodied, and talented, but also not directly related to a man who has already won an Oscar, it has been literally impossible for you to even be nominated in the last 25 years. Wow. And I think part of that has to do with this sort of inside-outside dynamic of Hollywood, where it's like the demented version of a high school lunch table, and like once you are inside, you are sort of safe and cool, and and outside people are very dreary and you get contaminated by outside people. So I feel like the part of this is that like if you have to, nominate a woman, if you have to hire a woman, you at least want a woman who's inside already, who you don't have to like risk contamination from the outside. And so I think, and I take nothing away from Greta Gerwig by saying this. She's so talented. I sobbed through Little Women. I loved it. I loved Lady Bird, but the reality is she's also like she's sort of been defined as okay, and they know she's not going to mouth off about it. Like a lot of the articles about this whole thing this year in the Oscars, it was Greta's team declines to comment, and that that's her decision, and that's fine. But like she's safe.
That's interesting because again, that's the role the woman always has to do. Ida Lupino, always downplayed her directing, and she wore a dress when she had downplayed everything, and that was her style. I think Nora Ephron kind of did the same thing. You downplay your power. That's another role that sort of women take on. Now, how would you feel? Because I'm in the Academy, and I've often thought, and I know it would be very controversial, but it's like, do you just say, well, then just do a Best Oscar for a woman's film then? And just admit that there's a bias.
Yeah.
And then have an award for women.
So I'm sort of two minds about this, because on the one hand, the subliminal messaging of that is could be interpreted as, well, the women can't play in the big leagues. They can't play in the NFL, so we're going to give them this side thing, even if the intention was to admit that there's a bias. If my preference, if somebody put me in charge of the Academy tomorrow, which so far nobody has done, I would do two things. I would say, okay, the biggest problem is the slant in the identity of the people who are voting in the Academy. Like, it's too old, too white, too male. And I know
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
Here's my theory, because I'm in the Academy.
Okay, yeah.
They bring in a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they don't vote.
They don't vote?
I think that's the problem. I run into a lot of people who have been invited into the Academy, and they don't vote. And so what ends up happening is that the old people that you mentioned, they're the ones that vote. So of course they vote for all their friends, and that's why it seems the same. But I can't
speak to that. But I do know that even though they have been inviting in more diverse classes, that it's still like 77% male and I think 82% white. So it's very slanted. So what I would say is, okay, we're gonna invite in way more people. Like, we're gonna keep inviting in larger and larger classes until those numbers are equalized. And I think the other thing you can do is you could go up to 10 nominations for Best Director and Best Writer, because there's the reality that like they're always going to nominate Tarantino, they're always going to nominate Scorsese every time they come out with a movie. So those fill slots, and then like you're down to a couple, and then but I think if you expanded that list, it might start to equalize it.
Were you aware, we did this on the Trailblazing Women show, it's still the same, it's 2020, we started the show in 2013. There are no female-directed films on the AFI Top 100 list, which was started in the 70s.
And there are like 8 war films, just to echo what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So many war movies.
Well, war movies are very important.
Very important, yes.
They're very award-worthy. But this was something I heard a lot from women I interviewed who had been to film school, which I have not. But they were saying you get into film school, very exciting, and then you get sent a list of 100 top films that you must watch before attending film school, and a lot of them just use the AFI list. And so they spend the summer before film school watching movie after movie by and about white guys, and they're whether or not they're consciously thinking about it, they're like my perspective doesn't matter. There's no path, and so that they describe by the end of film school being so demoralized because they've just been spent 4 years getting told that this is the only kind of movie that matters.
Right. And so to give you an example, when I was doing the show, I suggested as a film that they take off the list My Fair Lady. That was just my own personal pick. So I think it's 2 years ago. They did take off My Fair Lady and they replaced it with The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense. One of the AFI's top 100 films. That's not to say it's not a good movie. It's a fun movie.
Flick.
but it is, so to me it's so significant because you are saying as a society, and yes, there's a lot of politics behind who's picking the films, but aside from all of that, what they are saying to their own daughters is women do not make movies as good as men, which is ridiculous. That's the most ridiculous part of it, and everybody knows that, and yet they can't keep their own, I don't know, their own sense of wanting their own movies out there.
Right. And also that films about women don't matter, because I don't know what the statistics are, but I would guess that they are majority about men also, and about white men. It's sort of like, right, anybody's experience who isn't a white man is not award worthy. Like there's no greatness in stories except white men.
Well, yeah, again, there's, a movie I'm in, Goodfellas, is now on the AFI Top 100. It's and then they'll make up an excuse. They say, I go, well, what about the piano? Oh, it's foreign born. But what's on the list? Lawrence of Arabia. So women are almost, do you ever find that you're a little bit too smart by, it gets you into trouble because, I love when somebody gives you, but they can't put up the piano because it's a foreign film, and you go, but what about Lawrence of Arabia?
Right,
and they go,
right. Or what about
British.
Maybe putting Daughters of the Dust by Julie Dash on there? I mean,
Yes.
There's not a shortage of There's not a shortage of movies. It's just they have to slightly expand their worldview.
I think it's an ongoing, dilemma that women always are going to sound like they're complaining. I think that just becomes such a terrible.
Well, and certainly you hear this. I had a man on Twitter the other day say it's very tiring to hear women complain all the time, and I said not as tiring as it is to have to complain all the time. But that is why my editor and I chose the format of this book, which is compiling over 100 stories, right? Because you can explain away the lack of success of any one woman 1,000 different ways, and that this is what routinely happens. She's not talented enough. She's not working hard enough. Well, she has this weird kind of personality quirk. Well, she's too difficult. Well, she's not pretty enough. But if you look at it across a gender,
right,
and say these are the patterns of what everybody's experiencing, and also tie that to the data. So it's not just them feeling this, but those human experiences are adding up to these numbers. To say that across a gender is just to say that women are just less talented.
Well, I truly believe that men think women are less talented.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a paradigm that has just existed in painting, in music, in restaurants, in cooking.
Absolutely.
That is what we were, that's what we were. And that's where Jane Fonda says, we live in a patriarchy. So do you have any, so we can end on some positive notes.
Yeah.
I know you traveled around, and I think that's great. So you made your own film, and you traveled around with that, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so the book is actually very hopeful. It's sort of like Gloria Steinem's new book title says, the truth will set you free, but first it will really piss you off.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the experience that I'm hearing people having of reading this book is it's so painful to look straight at what has been happening to us,
right,
but then once you do, then it sets you free. So one of my main points is there will always be a pipeline problem. Even if we take in good faith that the powers that be do actually want to change this, which I have a lot of skepticism about, but let's say they do, and they're starting these diversity programs and they're hiring one woman here and there, that you don't get from 5% to 51% in our lifetimes with that rate, with that narrow pipeline. So my point, there's the title, the word revolution is in the title for a reason, which is that I think we full-blown insurrection is really our only option to fix this, and finding every possible way around. And I think the beauty of this moment that we're in is that because of the internet, because of streaming services, because of social media, because of the lowered cost of production, for the first time of any generation, we have the option of finding ways of making our content fully outside of the system, and also fully outside of the system, distributing to the audiences that demonstrably want it.
Yes.
So with my second feature film, that was the theory we undertook. In my first feature film, we actually got a traditional distribution deal, which was amazing, and theatrical release. But we felt like we were putting this film that was not recognized as valuable by the system into the system, which didn't make sense or result in good outcomes. So the next time we're like, forget it. We know exactly who our audience is. We know where they live. And we know that they want to put on a cape, come to a movie theater, and watch a movie with us in costume. That's what we knew. The film's called Bite Me. It's a romantic comedy about a real-life vampire and the IRS agent who audits her. So it's like more fun if you're wearing a cape in a room full of people wearing capes. So we rented an RV, and my husband, myself, and a documentary filmmaker spent 3 months driving around the country. We did 51 screenings in 40 cities in 90 days, which was bananas. And we drove 13,001 miles in a giant loop around the country, and we did exactly that. We put out the call to our fans, and we said, okay, well, where are you? Where do you want us to come? And we got 72 requests in the first 48 hours, which was more than we could do. But we just took the film to where the people were, and they loved it. We sold out screenings across the country. People drove 30 hours in costume to come to the screening closest to them. And it was so moving. Because what I also realized is that the middle of the country is so ignored by Hollywood.
Right.
And so, like, often I was the first filmmaker they'd ever met, and they were so excited to get to be in conversation with us and not only watch our movie, but tell us what they thought and have a party with us after. And it reinvigorated me about the importance of storytelling and also how important it is to build different systems, because the systems we have are just garbage right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that, that's a big personal decision, having done a book tour and traveling around too. I think people can find enormous success if they left Los Angeles or New York. But again, that's a personal decision, because sometimes people feel like, well, yes, I'm successful, but I want widespread kind of acceptance.
Sure, but also
I totally agree.
But I will say, because we demonstrated our audience through those methods, and we had numbers, and we had testimonials, and we actually ended up getting 6 offers from mainstream sales companies and distribution companies that we had not been given before this tour. So I do think that in building your audience is building your power, and then you can make the decision to jump back into the mainstream or not.
Yes. And then, do you have any female role models that who are out now that you want that are really sort of leading the way and good for them? Kind of people.
In terms of filmmakers, I would say like Dee Reese and Celine Sciamma and Lulu Wang and Melina Matsoukas and it's sort of that generation of women coming up who I think haven't invested as much in the system and are sort of like just making great stuff.
Yeah. I also think it's like looking for people that are, unexpected, producers behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
I've been surprised a couple times. I've reached out to producers and they've written back, or you don't get a lot of their time, but they'll give you a sentence or two to keep on fighting.
Yeah.
And sometimes even there's some of the female political commentators I've really been into. I've been like, I'm going to steal some of their sass. I think it's again just having a very hard armor and not being taken down by the negativity of, we don't want to see that kind of movie. You just have to keep persevering.
Well, and again, having the information, because I think I
think that's true.
To have when somebody says to you, oh, well, nobody wants to see films about women, you can say, okay, but talk to me about the fact that women purchase 52% of the movie tickets. And also, again, my main thing is like just removing their power by walking away from their value system,
right?
By finding ways around, by having shows on YouTube and podcasts, and I see this revolution, this grassroots revolution that's happening already. Right now, it's happening at the fringes, right, with web series and micro budget features and docuseries, but at a greater scale than ever before. Women and people of color and disabled folks and LGBTQ folks are making their stuff in greater volume than ever before and getting them to audiences. And right now it's in this layer that Hollywood just pretends doesn't exist, but it does exist. And the more that audiences get to taste that kind of fresh perspective, the more they're going to want it. And it feels to me like this magma bubble, like the more we do it, the more it sort of is going to create this upward pressure on the system.
I want to ask about that quickly. Sure. We've primarily been talking about film. You mentioned Dee Reese, Celine Sciamma, amazing female filmmakers. I'm a huge TV watcher. I know this is a film podcast, but do you think there's any evidence that maybe the revolution's happening a little more quickly in television? Like, I look at like Genji Kohan, like I love Glow. You look at Orange is the New Black.
Right. Shrill.
I was going to say Illeana was featured heavily on season 2 of Shrill, which features a plus-size female character. Incredible show. Yeah. Most of my favorite shows are female-driven. Yeah. I don't know if you can speak to that. Fleabag. Exactly. Yeah.
So, I have good news for you and bad news for you. So
I'm ready.
The good news is it's a little bit better for women in television. The percentages are more like around 15% as opposed to 5%, which is better, not close to 51%. Right. Part of what feels kind of confusing right now is that there's so much more content than there's ever been before. So we are seeing, it is true, a lot more of these shows. But if you look at the percentages have stayed the same. So like even though it's exciting that you can find those shows and I can find those shows that are exciting, what is being watched by the vast majority of the country and now the globe is about the same.
Okay.
But what I do think is really positive is that it's giving us a taste, right? Shonda Rhimes kind of broke television open by having these shows that looked as diverse as, and once you see that, then you're like, God, the rest of television is really white, and everybody had to kind of get on their game. So I do think that is hopeful. That I was giving a talk, and this 60-year-old African American woman came up to me afterwards, and she said, I just watched Queen Sugar. And she said, that is the first time I have ever seen myself or my family on screen.
Wow.
And she was like, in that moment, I understood that that's what white dudes feel all the time when they watch things.
Good.
So like that, so it's exciting that she had that experience for the first, not exciting that it was the first time, but that she got to have that experience. But we have to be careful about being like, great, it's solved now. Television's taking care of it, because it's still not.
Long way to go.
Long way to go.
Yeah.
At least it's something.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. But I'd like to see the AFI list, maybe in my lifetime. They'll find one movie that's good
somewhere.
Enough. For me, it was A League of Their Own. I don't understand why that's not in the AFI.
I mean, there
100.
are so...
That was my pick back in 2013.
Maybe we should do a sit-in until they change their list.
Well, again, there seems to be these pockets, like you get this outrage and people talk about it and then it sort of goes away. Right. And, again, I think it's up to women to just keep the pressure on and, again, be confident. Like you said, know your facts, read the books and just, and be there with examples of these other shows when you're pitching things.
And also to know your own value and to refuse to allow them to assign you a lesser value. And I think because so many women, like basically every woman I interviewed, we would go through her whole career history and talk about various points where she'd been held back. But at the end, to a woman, she said some version of course, it might just be my fault. Like, I may not be talented enough. Maybe it's just me. And like that shit, we gotta like check at the door. And even if we feel it, and we feel it because we live in a patriarchy and we've been told that that's true, we then fake it till you make it. Like, just you cannot let them tell you that your stories don't matter and your voice doesn't matter and you are wrong, because you are right and your stories do matter and audiences do want to hear them. And holding on to that confidence is really important, even if you have to fake it.
Yeah, I agree. All righty. Well, on that note, here's the book, The Wrong Kind of Woman. Go out and get it. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're working on another feature as well, right? If you want to talk
I
about that quickly, just before we get out of here.
Sure. It's tentatively titled Hammond Castle, and it's about a 7-month pregnant woman who gets locked overnight in a castle full of famous ghosts.
Okay, great.
Ooh, I love ghosts.
We can follow you on Twitter to hear more of that, I'm assuming?
Yep, Naomi McDougall J, or my website, NaomiMcDougallJones.com.
Be nice on Twitter. I don't get involved in it.
And we have amazing guests later this month, as Illeana mentioned.
Yes. Next week, Christina Lane was going to talk about this incredible producer, Joan Harrison. And then we're ending the month off with Kathy Griffin, and that ought to be mind-blowing.
That'll be mind-blowing, yeah.
Fasten your seatbelts. I can't wait. She's an amazing girl, and I've known her for a long time. Talk about a powerful woman.
Yeah.
Alrighty, everyone, as we end the show, as we always like to say, everyone's life is like a movie with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's the end of our movie today. Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you, Jeff. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everyone. And we'll be in touch, too, about next week and a call in to talk about your memories of the TCM Film Festival. So we're going to set that up and let everybody know through my Twitter. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into The Film Scene with Illeana Douglas, airing exclusively on the Popcorn Talk Network. We bring you this show for free because we're just as passionate and borderline obsessed with film as you are. And it would mean a lot if you would please subscribe to our podcast and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It takes 5 minutes to review the show, but it helps other film junkies find the show and continue to spread a love of classic and contemporary film. For guest inquiries or live bookings, you can email me, Jeff Graham, at guests@AfterBuzzTV.com. That's GUESTS@AFTERBUZZ.com. For more incredible film content, check us out online at The Popcorn Talk, and we'll see you after the credits.